the generation that was born at the tail end of the Second World War. There was this big population increase as the Second World War ended. So from the mid to late 1940s, large number of babies being born, and they were all coming of age in the 1960s. So from the mid to late 1960s, the baby boomers were coming into adulthood, and they were the ones that were being targeted by all this social manipulation. And there would be some reason why they just decided to completely traumatize and socially engineer that particular generation, because the society that we had in the 1970s at the tail end of all this stuff bore absolutely no resemblance to the way American society and, I would say global, if it wasn't for the Flat Earth crew. So I'll say worldwide society was very, very different to the way it had been in the early 1960s. And it was all achieved in just a relatively short number of years, with all this stuff working together, working in tandem with each other. And there were social changes happening in the UK at exactly the same time as it was being rolled out in the US. So is that by coincidence, or does that suggest some kind of coordination between agencies on both sides of the Atlantic, So, the cultural legacy of the 1960s is still being felt today in so many ways, and it changed society beyond recognition.
And the important point here is that it wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't organic. It was manipulated and developed out of the think tanks, the intelligence agencies, and the foundations. Because
we're led to believe it was spontaneous.
Yeah.
The official version, the Wikipedia version of it, would have you believe that all these kids, all these hippies, just started expressing themselves in this way and started creating this music and started opposing the Vietnam War. And LSD just kind of appeared out of nowhere, and it's just one of those things. So we're being asked to believe that it was all spontaneous. But what are the chances of all this stuff coming together at exactly the same time if left to chance? Come on now.
Yes. I mean, what you had here, particularly here in the United States, in the post-war era, you had the deliberate plan to suburbanize the country. That was break up the ethnic neighborhoods and create suburbia. At the same time, Madison Avenue is working with Hollywood to create the teenager. And this is done through the movies like James Dean and Rebel Without a Cause.
Right.
The music itself, prior to the 1950s, music wasn't generational. It transcended the generations. Music became generational, meaning that kids listen to certain type of music, adults listen to other types of music. And you also had the development of certain social movements that weren't organic. Feminism itself was a creation out of the foundations and the intelligence agencies. Gloria Steinem admits to being a CIA asset. Ms. Magazine was funded by the Washington Post and a few selected billionaires to promote feminism, to achieve create this trauma, to create divide society along the sexes. As you mentioned, you also had a lot of this musical changes coincided along with the development of the contraceptive pill, which would change sexual mores.
Sure.
A lot of this was to change the demographics of the country, to change the politics of the country. Because when you mentioned the baby boom in the United States, that was largely Catholic driven in the Second World. So, but of course, the rise of Catholic power in the United States disturbed the WASP elite here in this country. They even elected a president in 1960. The Catholics did.
Right.
So what you had, in order to weaken Catholic power, which was a big check on not only the WASP elite, but also the Jewish elite, particularly Hollywood, they had to destroy Catholic identity, the ethnic neighborhoods, the idea of the Italian Catholic, the German Catholic, the Polish Catholic, disperse them into suburbia, and they'd just become the white middle class. And that's when the psychological warfare kicks in with the music and the entertainment. And if you do the research on this, you find this is all being planned.
That's right.
Through so it's when you look at that part of it, it's not too surprising that what you write about, music and entertainment being weaponized to achieve some sort of sociological end, it isn't outlandish. In fact, it becomes very plausible, if not possible.
Exactly. When you look at all this other stuff that was in place and you see all these other connections, then the idea that music wouldn't have been employed as part of that plan suddenly becomes ridiculous. That becomes the absurd thing to claim, that it wouldn't have been used and it wouldn't have been, set to a certain agenda in that way. I don't know how you feel about the way things panned out in the 1970s following the 1960s, because we had all these incredible world events, as I said, and all these social changes that occurred in the 1960s. But to my reckoning, it was all pretty much done by the end of 1969. And you could even make an argument for Woodstock being the kind of, bookending the whole thing of what happened in the 1960s. That was where the agenda was kind of signed off in terms of all these big changes. So you had Woodstock in August 1969. And I think it was about a week or so before Woodstock, the Manson murders in Cielo Drive, Los Angeles. That was August 69 as well. So it seems to me, and then the Beatles split up in 69, and so that was the end of that whole dream, And it seems that there was something about the decade of the 1960s. And as the 70s dawned and progressed, everything culturally changed and was much less exciting and got a bit kind of drab and boring. And, that decade just kind of dragged on, and there was nothing particularly notable or sensational or memorable about it. Obviously there was a rock music scene that developed in that decade and went off down its own path. But the 70s was very different to the 1960s. And it just seems to me that there was something special about the 60s. I don't know if there was numerology involved, because we're talking about a dark occult priest class here that have a religious belief system that they operate to, and maybe there was something numerological about the 1960s. I certainly think there was about 1966, because as I've outlined, that was a year where a whole lot of stuff took place. That's the year that's linked to the Paul McCartney replacement. It's the year that Anton LaVey established the Church of Satan. And it surely can't be a coincidence that 66, as in 666, was chosen as the year for that. You had the movie Rosemary's Baby, which is all about satanic secret societies and how they hide in plain sight. And that movie was released in 1968, but it was set in 1966. So one of the characters points to a calendar of 1966 in the movie, and he says, "This is year one." That's his words. It's year one. It all begins in 1966. So there's a lot of stuff connected to that particular year. And there's all kinds of connections also. You've got the Church of Satan, which it turns out has intrinsic links into the entertainment industry, because there were a lot of high-profile entertainers that were actually a part of the Church of Satan, such as Sammy Davis Jr. and Jane Mansfield in the 1960s. And then more recently, you've had Marilyn Manson, who's been an ordained priest in the Church of Satan. Mark Almond of Soft Cell has been linked to it. And somebody emailed me yesterday, actually, to point out that there was a very short-lived girl duo called Strawberry Switchblade in the UK in the mid-1980s. And this person suggests that Rose McGowan of Strawberry Switchblade was brought into the Church of Satan by Mark Almond. I've not been able to check that out, but that's another link that somebody has suggested to me. So then you've got links going out from the Church of Satan into this other very shady, questionable organization in the 1960s known as the Process Church. The Process Church of the Final Judgment, which operated out of San Francisco. And there are various key figures that have been associated with that organization, such as David Berkowitz, who was the son of Sam serial killer, or at least the guy that took the rap for those murders, because many think that there were ritualistic occult elements to the way those murders were done, and that Berkowitz was merely the fall guy for it, and other forces were at work. But anyway, you've got that, and then you've got Sirhan Sirhan. This is something that was told to me by Ed Opperman when I was on his show. He reckons that Sirhan Sirhan, the guy that is said to have assassinated Robert Kennedy, was seen at a whole bunch of Process Church gatherings and sort of, parties. So there's a suggestion that he came out of that organization, which in turn is linked to the Church of Satan and then into the music industry. The Rolling Stones were very closely associated with Kenneth Anger, this satanic filmmaker, who himself was an associate of Anton LaVey of the Church of Satan. And there are many who think that Kenneth Anger was the real power force behind the Church of Satan, with Anton LaVey just being the sort of public face of it. So now you've got a connection from the Rolling Stones going into the Church of Satan, and therefore the Process Church. And the Process Church were involved with Charles Manson and his disciples. And one of them was a guy by the name of Bobby Beausoleil. Bobby Beausoleil was associated with Kenneth Anger once again and was said to be his homosexual lover. And Bobby Beausoleil was recruited to write the soundtrack to the film Lucifer Rising, which is one of Kenneth Anger's famous short films. And so Bobby Beausoleil at the time was in jail for the murder of a music teacher by the name of Gary Hinman, and he composed the soundtrack to Lucifer Rising from his jail cell. And previously, the soundtrack to that movie had been produced by Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin, who was also in the early days associated with the Rolling Stones. And Mick Jagger provided the soundtrack to Invocation of My Demon Brother, another famous short film of Kenneth Anger. So now you've got connections between the Rolling Stones, Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin, Kenneth Anger, the Church of Satan, the Process Church of the Final Judgment, the Son of Sam serial killings, and the Manson family murders. Why should there be any connections there at all? And yet there are. It's crazy.
And of course, with the music industry itself, its linkage back to, I guess, the Satan or the devil. That goes back to this idea of Robert Johnson, right? He sold his soul to play the blues.
Yeah,
at the crossroads.
That's the myth and the legend that we get. You know, he's like the original artist that's heralded as having sold his soul in exchange for fame and fortune. So there's this legend that he met the devil at a crossroads, which is supposed to be a place where this world, this realm meets the supernatural realm and entities can be brought through. And the story is that Robert Johnson traded his mortal soul to the devil in exchange for great musical talent. And from that point, he became a very established and accomplished blues musician. And he died in very strange circumstances at the age of 27. So in many ways, he was the original member of what's come to be known as the 27 Club, which is this group of musicians who just happen to have died in some form or other at the age of 27. There are many prominent musicians among their number. One of them actually was a member of the Grateful Dead. There was a guy called Ron McKernan, who was known as Pigpen, out of the Grateful Dead, and he died at the age of 27. And you also have Jim Morrison, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Kurt Cobain, Amy Winehouse, who have I forgotten? Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones, and a whole bunch of others.
Yeah, and I think Graham Parsons was like a week shy of his 27th birthday.
Yeah, he didn't quite make it.
Yeah. And there's also, lesser known, but he was the creative force behind Badfinger's Pete Ham.
Right.
He died at 27 too.
You can actually find a reference to the 27 Club on Wikipedia.
Yeah.
where they do actually list all the musicians that are said to be a part of it. So you can fill in the blanks there.
Yeah, Anton LaVey is an interesting character because he's like a carnival barker or something, and
yeah, he was a circus lion tamer or something circus performer.
Yeah, a showman, but very much like I guess you could say, someone's like Aleister Crowley in many ways. But because he, like Crowley, he had ties to intelligence. I think Anton LaVey worked for the San Francisco police for a while, and his Church of Satan was founded upon property that was owned by the U.S. military.
Wow.
Near the Presidio.
I didn't know that, but it doesn't surprise me.
And the Presidio itself was then bought by the Disney Corporation. And, of course, the Presidio, it was, the infamous sex scandals out there regarding the daycare center. And that had ties to, you mentioned him earlier, was Colonel Aquino, the Church of Satan guy who, I guess he found the Temple of Set.
Right.
And not only that, he was also involved in Operation Phoenix in Vietnam. He wrote Psychological Warfare Doctrine for the Pentagon, and was also the head chaplain for the U.S. military.
That's right.
He's a devil worshiper.
That's right. And just what you mentioned, the connection into Walt Disney there, just reminded me of what I heard about this covert military research facility right in the middle of Laurel Canyon.
Well, that's interestingly too. Yeah.
Yeah, you got this research facility right there in the Hollywood Hills in this area called Laurel Canyon, which had absolutely no musical heritage at all prior to 1965, as Dave McGowan pointed out in his book Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. And so you had all these artists flocking magnet-like to Laurel Canyon from all over the US and beyond, and that created the whole counterculture, folk rock scene that grew up out of Laurel Canyon. And there just happened to be this military, base there.
Yeah, Lookout Mountain.
Yeah, Lookout Mountain. And when you look into the background of that, there are stories that Walt Disney apparently worked there for a time, and Marilyn Monroe is said to have been employed at that facility in some capacity or other.
John Wayne, Jimmy Stewart.
Right.
And they never talked about their work there, and it was supposedly the most advanced studio, special effects,
That's right. Yeah.
And this goes back to our idea of occulted knowledge.
Yep.
And this also produced the testing films of the atom bomb.
Right.
I know why they would need that is never explained, but some people have studied the films of the atom bomb tests and have concluded that they're faked. There's a lot of layering, special effect technology used in these things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then that place was sold and it became a private residence.
Yeah.
And I would have to look up who it is. Somebody connected to the music industry bought
Leto
that.
or something? Jerry Leto or something?
Yeah, Jay Leno, yeah, the chat show guy.
I think it's Leto, isn't it? Leto or Jerry Leto?
Leto, yeah, whichever, yeah.
But the point is that again shows the link between the intelligence, military, Hollywood, music, entertainment out there. They're all working together to manipulate the culture, which goes back to what Plato was talking about, right? So,
well, that's right. We've kind of come full circle, haven't we? And ended up where we started off, which is there are links everywhere between these different institutions that you wouldn't expect to find, and yet you do. Time and time and time again, decade after decade after decade. So if that doesn't convince people that there's more to know about the true nature of the entertainment industry than what lies on top and all the surface gloss and stuff, then I really don't know what more we could have said.
Yeah, and because what you have to do is actually, instead of just listening to a podcast here and there, is actually read the book. Right?
Well, yeah, that would be a good option as well, I would say.
Read the book, Musical Truth. And what's the best place to get that book?
Well, it is available on Amazon, so you can get a paperback version, a hardback version, or a Kindle version, as you prefer. If you just type in Mark Devlin Musical Truth in Amazon, you'll find it there. It's on Barnes & Noble as well. But if anyone wants to get a signed copy of the book from me personally, I'm offering to mail those out. It's a better deal for an author to sell books themselves because Amazon takes a big chunk otherwise, and they're not the most ethical company in the world. So if anyone wants to buy a book from me direct, I can sign it and put a message in it. All you got to do is send me an email to mark@markdevlin.co.uk, and if you can pay by PayPal, then I will mail a book out to you. So just drop me an email and we can make it all happen from there. So there's a bit of blurb about the book on musicaltruthbook.com, and all my other activities, including my podcast series. I do two. One is called The Sound of Freedom, which is conscious, meaningful music that uplifts you and comes with a message and is the antithesis to all the spirit-crushing, toxic garbage that you hear on the radio. If you hate all that stuff, then check out this series, because this is real music doing what real music should. So there's that one. Then there's Good Vibrations, which is my conversation-based series. I'm up to 87 volumes there, and I've had everyone on there from David Icke to Mark Passio to Jay Widener to Fritz Springmeier to Freeman to Jay Dyer, anyone you can think of on this scene, really. So that they're all available via my main site, which is markdevlin.co.uk. So that's the link to all my other activities.
I've heard a rumor that you're working on a sequel to Musical Truth.
Yes, I am. I'm going to be bringing out Musical Truth 2. So the plan is the rest of 2016 will be spent promoting this book and doing a whole bunch of interviews like this one. And then 2017, I'm going to knuckle down to researching and writing Volume 2, which I hope to have out in 2018. So there's a whole bunch of subject areas that I couldn't get into this book. There's a whole bunch that I did, such as, we didn't touch on MK Ultra and Monarch programming today, so there's a lot of stuff about that in the book. There's a lot of stuff about the transhumanist scene, the transhumanism agenda, and how that ties into music.
Auto-tuning, right?
Yep, auto-tune is involved, yep. And there's the systematic degeneration of hip-hop culture and black culture generally. So I'm going to go into all of that in this book, Musical Truth Volume 1. But some of the stuff that I couldn't get into it include cymatics and the science of sound, and I really want to understand better what's going on in musical recordings at an unseen level that is affecting people's brainwave states and their energy field and maybe dictating their emotions and their perceptions without them having any idea what's going on, because it's all done in the sound frequencies.
Is that the 432 versus 440?
Yes, it brings it in. Yeah.
Okay.
So I really want to go in on that 432 versus 440 hertz, and getting into the work of Dr. Masuro Emoto, the Japanese guy that did work into how water has consciousness, and when you expose water crystals to certain words, And this can be words in written form or spoken form, or even words in the lyrics of songs. It causes the consciousness in the water to behave in a certain way. And when the water is exposed to words that are charged with malevolent intent or hate or fear, then it produces very discordant, disharmonious patterns. So given that the majority of our bodies are made up of water, if words and lyrics and sound can have that effect on water, then what is going on in our human bodies and minds when we're exposed to music, so-called, that has been produced with malevolent intent applied? Yeah. So if the music makers have charged a piece of music with their intent and they want it to have this disturbing negative effect on us, what could be going on at an unseen level? So I want to get into that. And I also want to get into understanding the heavy rock scene a bit more, heavy metal and such. And I mean, that's a genre that's been associated with devil worship and Satanism for decades. And I think most people understand that those associations are there. But I just want to better get into the true nature of what's really going on. And then the electronic dance music scene as well, rave culture. And whether that was a more modern expression of what went on in the original Summer of Love with the hippie explosion in 1967. We had echoes of that happening 21 years later in 1988 when there was ecstasy everywhere, MDMA. And that was kind of the equivalent of LSD from back in the day. So you had all this amazing new dance music accompanied by this new drug that all the kids were taking. And that changed the fabric of social culture at the tail end of the 1980s and going forward through the 90s as well. So is there evidence of a hidden hand manipulating that scene as well? I'd be very surprised if there wasn't. So all that stuff is what I plan to get into in Musical Truth too.
Interesting. Yeah, that's really getting into the weeds on that one. That sounds interesting. Yeah, because I've again, if you look at what music, and I think it was the Rockefellers who did research regarding 432 versus 440.
Those nice people.
Back in the 20s, and they decided to go. Which one is it that is disharmonious?
Well, 432 is said to be the harmonious frequency, the love frequency, nature's frequency.
Yeah, but
and 440 is anything but. 440 is the frequency that you should absolutely not be listening to music at, because it has the opposite effect. It's unnatural. It's discordant.
Yeah, that's how it's marketed to us.
Yeah. Well, most people aren't even aware that this stuff is going on. Most people in the street would not even be aware of what 440 hertz is. But musicologists and musicians and those that study this stuff have long been aware that 432 is the one we should be using, and we're not. And it was at the hands of the Rockefeller Foundation that this change took place. So there's a red flag for you.
Right there. So interesting. Well, listen, I want to thank you for coming on the show. I know you're very busy with the interviews, so I'm really grateful for for how much time you gave me for this interview. It's great.
Yeah, thanks, man. And we went some different places with this one, because with most interviews, I'm going through chapter by chapter what's in the book. Yeah. But we really dotted around and went some interesting places with this. So
that's what I wanted to do. And I stress, if you're listening to this and to listen to, well, to buy the book, of course, but also just go to your podcast and also listen to the various interviews you've done on this topic. Because there are a few where you go by chapter and you go by detail and some of the things you're talking about.
Yeah, I think our mutual friend Ivan from Phoenix, Ivan interviewed me. I know he's interviewed you as well.
Yeah.
And he interviewed me on my own podcast and sort of he was the host. He jumped on as the host and he said, okay, talk us through chapter by chapter what's in the book. So I did break down exactly what's in there in that interview. And that's part of my Good Vibrations podcast. But I've learned a lot from you on this one, man.
Well, thank you.
I've picked up some bits of information from you. So that's a worthwhile interview.
Yeah, you have that interview posted on your website with Ivan from Phoenix, right?
Yeah, they're all there. All my Good Vibrations podcasts are grouped together on my SoundCloud page, actually. But you can link through to the SoundCloud from my main website, markdevlin.co.uk. And anyone that wants to send me an email, whether you want to get a book, whether you want to correspond with me or share some information with me, or whether you just want to get pointed towards where all these interviews are, just drop me an email to mark@markdevlin.co.uk. I respond to every email I get, and I'm always happy to hear from people, unless they're CIA agents and shills and troublemakers, in which case you won't get a reply because I don't go there.
Okay, great. Listen, thanks, Mark, and listen, enjoy the remains of your holiday.
Yeah, thanks, Tim.
And maybe we'll talk later in the future.
All right, man. Good to kick it to you. Cheers.
Good day. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks.